A lot of times they don't know what we're all about, what's inside. I've seen jaws dropped countless times. They've come up the Sally Port and see the buildings inside, see the exhibits, and just had no idea it was anything beyond the stone walls that they see from a distance.
It was built by the British in 1755. Was destroyed by the French in 1756, rebuilt by the British in 1759, attacked by the French, but they were driven off this time. During the Revolutionary War, it was a British post. It was temporarily abandoned in 1777 by the British after the failed campaign in the Mohawk Valley to take Fort Stanwix.
The very first fort was built on the west side of the river in 1727, called Fort Oswego. The next one on the other side of the river, on the east side, is where Fort Ontario is now. That was built a little later in 1755 during what we call the French and Indian War. Oswego was very important strategically. This area, the Oswego River, essentially connects the Great Lakes to the river systems that lead out to the Atlantic Ocean. So in some ways, it was sort of a waterway or an aquatic highway joining really the Atlantic Ocean with the interior of the continent, with the Great Lakes. So if you wanted to control anything in the continental interior, all of the goods moving out of the Great Lakes, furs, timber, really anything, Oswego was a really important spot to control. And important places to control are often contested, right? There are battles and conflicts fought over those patches of territory. So really throughout the 18th and then into the 19th century, Oswego was a contested place.
Fort Ontario is not only of state significance, it's of national significance because of its role in the French and Indian War, Revolutionary War, War of 1812. But most importantly, I think highest prominence is its role as the only refugee camp for victims of the Nazi Holocaust in World War II. Mostly Jewish victims, many who had escaped, got through Nazi German lines to Italy and were brought here for safekeeping. President Roosevelt brought them here as an example for other countries to start taking refugees. These people had no homes to return to, they had nowhere else to go.
There are very few historic sites in this country that has a touchstone on every American conflict from before the Revolutionary War right through World War II.
It's fascinating to think that this little city now, which is relatively peaceful, maybe not on a Saturday night during the college season, was the scene of major armed conflict between large European armies, local militias, Native American groups that also had a real interest in the outcomes. So Oswego was contested, bloody ground for much of its early history.
First arrived at Fort Ontario as Chief of Interpretation in July 1986. I left in 1992 to work down in the Hudson Valley at George Washington's headquarters in Newburgh, and came back as manager of Fort Ontario on October 1st, 1999. Physically, trying to keep the fort open all year is difficult because of the wind and snow and rather challenging conditions, especially in the past year. What I think we need to maintain an all-year tourism here is a visitor center for Fort Ontario.
I've known people who've met people who've grown up their entire lives in Oswego and didn't know the fort was here.
That's often the tragedy of things like historical preservation, is that it's often difficult to get funds together to do this.
I don't know. The big question is, do people still come? And that's a real concern because ideally cultural tourism is important. It's important to a community. I don't know how you engage a younger generation. 25, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, people came because they revered the history. They revered the great white men type of thing. Now I don't know. I don't know that you are getting over the threshold.
Unfortunately, the fort itself is somewhat limited. Our staff has been, and budget has been cut over and over again with being part of the New York State Park system. And that's not just us, that's across the board. A little known fact is that we are not allowed to advertise outside of the I Love New York program.
The information age, along with the internet, allows the information to be at hand. So the necessity of needing to go out and finding information and studying on certain subjects or topics that are decades or even centuries old isn't that enticing, because they could simply go online, type it into Wikipedia, and find something else, something at any point that they'd like to.
Why would you use a paper map when you can get your directions online? I think there's connections that just aren't being made. Somehow it doesn't seem to speak to them.
The greatest obstacle is probably only a temporary one. It is limited staff and budgets. Maintaining the facility, the physical part of the facility. We have short staff, reduced budgets, and that is puts a strain on resources and people. And we also have to work on changing attitudes in the business community, something the governor is doing, and recognizing that places like Fort Ontario are major tourist attractions that really benefit our economy.
One of the main frustrations has been the lack of technology at the fort. Like, we don't even have internet here, or Wi-Fi at least.
It's very important, I think, particularly for the region. I know that New York State has an extraordinary amount of colonial history in particular, something that people are interested in. So I think it could be beneficial to the regional economy, right? If more people come to check out the fort and visit the grounds, they'll also be doing other things around here in Oswego County. So I think it could be part of a broader kind of strategy to develop the region and lead to more economic growth, right? People like history, right? The History Channel is popular on the dial, so it makes sense that would work here in Oswego too.
We're trying to elevate Fort Ontario's prominence in the community as an economic resource. History is a business. Heritage tourists are the biggest spenders of all tourists. People come in from the outside, spend money in our hotels, our restaurants, our shops, they visit the fort, then they leave. They bring a lot of money into the economy. And the fort is like a factory, only it's operating maybe 20-30% capacity. If we brought more people in, we could really help the local economy.
I think it's important for people to understand not only what happened in the past, but why. So I think events like this can help place things in context.
I came to the 1812 Symposium because I've always been interested in history. I don't know much about the Oswego area history. I grew up downstate, so I wanted to find out history about this area.
It's kind of a forgotten war that Americans don't typically think of. And to bring any kind of general public attention to it is a good thing, because it's a war that should be honored more. The information should get out there better than it is so far. It's a good thing for people to learn about.
The symposium is, for the first time, I guess this is maybe the second or third year that the symposium is on. I'm a faculty advisor to the student interns that are helping Paul organize the symposium. They've worked on various projects to help Paul and visitors understand the complex history of the past, from photographic journals to archival research, really anything that can advance really our understanding of the site and help students participate in really public history.
It's great to be able to spend an afternoon or a weekend with people who are interested in the same things you are, to meet up with other people who are doing research, to hear the latest research. That's important. It's important for networking, for sharing information, for disseminating scholarly information. I think it's important to bring people together. there's so much that can happen online, but I think there's something important to be said for sharing. You know, you get to really talk about things that you might not otherwise have the opportunity to share.
History is the result of human interaction. And you can read about the human interaction, but to get an element of it by learning from another person while there's others around you, learning along with you so you can all discuss, brings history a little more, the history that you're learning about a little more alive because there's other people to experience it with you, even if it's not actually happening.
It's a very special place. It has a charm all its own that captures people. It's always amazed me how many people come to the fort through word of mouth. We have had visitors from places like Norway and Germany and come to the fort, and you ask them, well, why did you decide to come here? Well, somebody they knew had come there some time ago, and I'm thinking, you know, you're coming to the United States for a holiday and you look up Fort Ontario. And yet it happens over and over again.
I think the potential is just being developed. Everyone is really waking up to the fact that we have great potential here. And that if we promote the fort properly, which one thing the governor is doing through the Pass Through History program, he's raising awareness of our history throughout the state and promoting it around the country.
I don't know much about history myself, but it is important because it's the staple of this town. It's what this town is built off of. It's where the history came from. There's so much that happened here, and I think it's important everyone knows at least a little bit about it.
You should never forget, you know, what men and women have done for our country, you know, in their service and sacrifice. And your generation is doing this right now. You know, we're at war. It's people like you who are out there on the lines in Afghanistan and elsewhere in the war on terror. So that's why it should be preserved and why people like you should come visit it.
If we can become part of SUNY Oswego students' memories of being at Oswego, we know that they'll come back with their family and will spread the word to their friends as well. As
a historian, you know, I've always loved historic sites, even when I was a kid. They're fascinating places where so much happened, and I just think it's obviously important to understand our past, you know, understand the complexity of it, to understand, you know, why society is the way it is today. So there's that obvious thing, but forts in general are just any historic site, right? They're just great places for people to go, to learn about our shared past, to reflect on it, to have fun. They're great spaces to picnic, to bring the dog. The fort is next to baseball fields too, right? They're public spaces. So in general, public spaces are where we were able to get together and enjoy life. And with Fort Ontario, you have the added benefit of a deeply historical site that was the scene of some real pivotal turning points in early American history. So to me, it's a no-brainer. It's of huge historical significance. It's a beautiful site situated on the lake. Why would you not want to preserve that?